There is a specific moment in every investor's timeline when compounding stops feeling like a slow drain on your discipline and starts doing something almost automatic. Most people never reach it, not because they lack the money, not because they chose the wrong funds, not because they missed some crucial piece of knowledge, but because they quit during the exact window when the system is doing its most important and least visible work, building the base that everything else will eventually scale from. This video maps that window precisely. It explains why the early years feel like nothing, why that feeling is not evidence of failure but of structural progress, and what the architecture of staying the course actually requires, not as an act of willpower but as a structural decision. The framework is called the 7-5-3-1 rule. 4 numbers. Each one addresses a specific phase of the compounding process, a specific failure point, and a specific decision that changes the long-term outcome. By the end, the mechanism should feel less like something you need to endure and more like something you understand clearly enough to trust. Why the early years feel like nothing, and why that is the point. In the first year of investing £200 a month into a global index fund at a 5% average annual return, the market contributes approximately £6 to your account. £6. That number is not discouraging because you are doing something wrong. It is structurally inevitable, and understanding why changes everything about how you interpret the early years of your investment timeline. Compounding is exponential by nature. It scales with the base it operates on. In year 1, that base is small, perhaps £2,400 of contributions. More than 95% of your balance growth comes directly from your own deposits. The market's contribution is mathematically present. It is almost invisible. By year 20, that same portfolio has grown to approximately £80,000, generating roughly £330 every month in investment returns alone, without a single additional pound from you. The mechanism has not changed. The base has, and a base of £80,000 at 5% produces returns that dwarf what the same rate produced on a base of £2,400. This is the fundamental architecture of compounding, and it explains the single most damaging behaviour in investing: quitting before the base has grown large enough for the returns to become visible. Financial progress in the early years is not visible in your balance. It is visible in your trajectory. The rate at which your growth rate is growing is the signal that matters, not the absolute number on the screen. There is a specific trap that makes this harder to navigate in the current British environment. Easy access savings accounts and cash ISAs are offering rates between 4 and 5%. That feels like a reasonable return. The money is accessible, the interest appears monthly. The feedback is immediate and concrete. Run the comparison honestly. £50,000 in a high-yield savings account at 4.5% for 30 years becomes approximately £170,000. The same amount in a diversified index fund compounding at a consistent 7% annual return becomes approximately £380,000. The difference, over £200,000, is the opportunity cost of prioritising the account that feels productive over the account that compounds productively. The human brain is structured to weight immediate visible rewards far more heavily than distant abstract ones. A savings account pays you every month. An index fund rewards you every decade. That asymmetry in feedback timing is the primary reason disciplined, financially literate investors abandon sound strategies. Not ignorance, but the discomfort of investing in something that does not feel like it is doing anything. Understanding the deception window intellectually is the first step. The framework provides the rest. 7 years, the first number. The first number in the 7-5-3-1 framework is 7, and the reasoning behind it is mathematical before it is motivational. Every rolling 7-year period in the history of major developed market indices, including the periods containing the Great Depression, the 2008 financial crisis, the dot-com collapse, and the 2022 bear market, has produced a positive average annual return. Not every individual year, not every 2-year stretch, every rolling 7-year period. Shorter time horizons expose you to sequence risk, the danger of entering the market at a peak, experiencing a correction, and measuring your returns at the bottom. Invest for 2 years and you might catch exactly the wrong phase of a market cycle. Invest for 7 and the odds of finishing ahead of where you started exceed 95% by historical measure. This has a specific implication for British investors that is not often discussed clearly. A market downturn in the early years of your investment timeline is not a disaster. It is structurally advantageous. When prices fall, your monthly contributions into your stocks and shares ISA, your SAT IP, your workplace pension, purchase more units at lower prices. Those discounted units then compound for decades. The same crash that would devastate someone drawing down assets in retirement is a buying opportunity for someone in accumulation. The 7-year commitment is not an arbitrary number. It is the time horizon at which the statistical certainty of positive returns becomes robust enough to make staying the course a rational decision rather than a faith-based one. For For younger British investors specifically, those navigating a labour market where real wage growth has been constrained, carrying student loan balances that function like a graduate tax, and facing a housing market where property as the primary wealth-building vehicle is increasingly inaccessible. Long-term equity investing inside tax-efficient wrappers is not just one option among many. It is, structurally, the most accessible route available to building meaningful net worth. The 7-year commitment is where it begins. 5 categories, the second number. Most financial content presents diversification as a return optimization strategy, a way to get slightly better risk-adjusted performance by spreading exposure. Its deeper function is behavioural. A portfolio that declines 15% during a market correction keeps you invested. A portfolio that declines 40% triggers a visceral loss response that ends investment timelines. The primary design goal of a well-structured portfolio is not maximising return. It is controlling drawdowns to a level your nervous system can tolerate over decades, because a portfolio you abandon at the worst moment produces no long-term return, regardless of how sound the underlying assets are. The 5-category structure in this framework reflects that logic. Broad market index funds form the foundation. The difference in annual charges between a passive global index fund at 0.05 to 0.15% and an actively managed equivalent at 0.8 to 1.2% compounds silently over 30 years into a sum that, on a significant portfolio, can exceed the cost of a car. In the UK, funds available through platforms like Vanguard, iShares and Fidelity make this accessible to anyone with a stocks and shares ISA, or SIP. The charge difference alone is a meaningful long-term return advantage. Dividend growth equities provide income continuity when price appreciation stalls. In an environment where inflation remains a relevant concern, companies with a history of consistent dividend growth demonstrate real pricing power, the ability to raise prices without losing customers, which is exactly the characteristic that preserves purchasing power in a portfolio over time. Smaller and mid-sized company exposure adds a historically documented return premium over large-cap equities, not in every year, but meaningfully over long periods. Within a UK investor's stocks and shares ISA, this can be accessed through global small-cap index funds at low cost. International exposure addresses the significant portion of global market capitalisation that a UK-only or even a developed markets-only portfolio structurally misses. Britain represents a relatively small fraction of global corporate earnings. A global index fund provides automatic international diversification as part of its construction. Short-duration fixed income, gilts, short-dated bond funds, serves as the stability layer that keeps corrections from becoming exits. When equities fall sharply, the fixed income portion of a portfolio typically holds value or increases, providing both psychological ballast and the practical option to rebalance by buying equities at lower prices. The behavioural dimension of this structure is worth stating directly. Research consistently shows that investors in diversified portfolios underperform the index by approximately 3 to 4 percentage points annually, not because of poor fund selection, but because of poorly timed decisions driven by emotional states. On £100,000 invested over 20 years, that behavioural gap represents a sum that dwarfs any fee-saving or fund selection decision. It functions as a tax, invisible on any statement, paid entirely by the investor to no one. The 5-category structure is the architecture that makes the behavioural gap smaller. Not by eliminating volatility is the price of return, but by making volatility survivable. 3 emotional phases, the third number. The 3 in the 7531 framework refers to the 3 emotional phases every long-term investor passes through. Naming them in advance does not eliminate them, but it transforms them from evidence that something is wrong into expected landmarks on a known route. Phase 1 is the deception window. This is the extended early period, potentially several years. When contributions are real, the strategy is sound, and the balance barely moves. The market is contributing, but the base is too small for those contributions to register meaningfully. The frustration of this phase is structurally inevitable and frequently fatal. This is when most investors either reduce contributions, redirect money towards something with more immediate feedback, or abandon the strategy entirely, often citing a reason that sounds analytical, but it's actually emotional. Phase 2 is the frustration plateau. The portfolio has grown to a size where the mechanism is working more visibly, but social media, peer comparison, and the constant surfacing of outlier outcomes, the leveraged property deal, the concentrated bet that paid off, the colleague who claims extraordinary returns, creates a distorted picture of what normal, sound investing produces. The investor who understands that these visible outliers represent the survivorship bias of a much larger set of failed versions of the same bets is in a fundamentally different psychological position to one who does not. Deliberately managing your financial information environment, what you read, which communities you engage with, whose investment commentary you consume, is not a soft lifestyle choice. It is part of portfolio management with a calculable impact on long-term returns. Phase 3 arrives with a market crash. Losses register psychologically at approximately 2.5 times the intensity of equivalent gains. A portfolio that has declined 20% does not feel like a portfolio that needs to recover 25% to break even. It feels like a catastrophe. And that emotional intensity is the mechanism behind the most damaging investment decision most people ever make. Selling during a drawdown, crystallizing a loss, and sitting in cash during the recovery. The S&P 500 declined nearly 20% in 2022. UK equity markets fell similarly. The investors who sold near the bottom locked in permanent losses. Those who held captured the full recovery that followed in 2023 and 2024. Same market, same opportunity, completely different outcomes, driven entirely by a single decision made under emotional pressure. The critical insight is that panic-proofing a portfolio happens before the crash, not during it. Written investment parameters, a clear statement of your strategy, your time horizon, your rebalancing rules, established during a calm market, when the decision carries no emotional charge, become the objective reference point when the emotional charge is at its highest. Automated contribution structures serve the same function. If the monthly transfer to your stocks and shares ISA, or SIAP, happens automatically, you do not face the decision of whether to invest during a downturn. The system makes the decision, and that removes the emotional variable from the most important moment. One annual increase, the fourth number. The final number in the framework is one annual increase in your investment contribution. It is also the variable with the most disproportionate long-term impact, precisely because it operates in alignment with something that happens naturally. Income grows over time. The question is what proportion of that growth gets absorbed by lifestyle expansion and what proportion gets redirected toward compounding? The mathematics here are precise enough to warrant specificity. A baseline of £250 a month invested at 6% annual returns over 30 years produces approximately £250,000. Increase that contribution by just 3 to 5% each year. £257 in year 2, £265 in year 3, and so on. And the ending balance climbs substantially. The difference is not generated by a dramatic financial overhaul. It is generated by a series of small scheduled adjustments that individually feel almost negligible and collectively produce an outcome that dwarfs the baseline. Median wage growth in Britain has tracked between 3 and 5% in recent years. If your income rises by 4% and your investment contribution rises by 2%, your take-home pay still increases. The contribution increase registers as a deliberate financial decision, but it never manifests as a lifestyle sacrifice. The margin that would otherwise have been absorbed by lifestyle inflation is redirected before it becomes a spending habit. Inside a stocks and shares ISA, up to £20,000 per year, growing free of capital gains tax and income tax on withdrawal, every pound of this escalation compounds in the most tax-efficient structure available to British investors. Inside a workplace pension, where basic rate taxpayers receive 20% tax relief on contributions and higher rate taxpayers receive 40%. The effective cost of each pound contributed is substantially less than its face value. The annual contribution increase directed first toward these wrappers produces compounding returns that are not just higher than the headline figure. They are higher than the headline figure net of the tax relief that made them cheaper to fund in the first place. The framework converging. The rule of 72 makes the long-term outcome of this framework concrete. At 6% average annual return, capital doubles approximately every 12 years. £50,000 accumulated by age 35 becomes approximately £100,000 by 47, approximately £200,000 by 59, and continues compounding into and through retirement, without a single additional contribution after the initial accumulation phase. The foundation phase is the multiplier that every subsequent pound of contribution scales from. The earlier it is built, the larger the base every future return operates on. 3 starting points illustrate this with precision that is worth sitting with. An investor who begins at 22, contributing £200 a month for 40 years at 6%, accumulates approximately £400,000. One who starts at 32 with the same monthly amount accumulates approximately £200,000 over 30 years. A third who begins at 42 finishes with approximately £90,000 after 20 years. All 3 invested the same £200 every month. The only variable is when they started. The earliest investor ends up with more than 4 times the wealth of the one who began 20 years later, not because they contributed more, but because time had more base to work with. That is the arithmetic of duration. It is not motivational content. It is mathematics, identity, the final layer. There is a dimension of long-term investing that frameworks and mathematics cannot fully address, but that research consistently identifies as the decisive variable in whether any strategy gets executed over decades. Identity. Investors who internalize an investor identity, who think of themselves as investors rather than people who happen to have an ISA, maintain their strategy through volatility at significantly higher rates than those who do not. Not because the identity provides new information, but because it changes the default behaviour. When the market falls, the question shifts from, should I still be doing this? To, what does an investor do here? And that question has a clear answer. The compounding deception window is the mechanism that separates disciplined investors from everyone else. 7 years of statistical certainty, 5 categories of structural resilience, 3 emotional phases mapped and anticipated, 1 annual increase that mirrors your growing capacity to build. None of these elements are complicated in isolation. What makes them powerful is their interaction over time. Wealth is not built when progress feels visible. It is built during the years it does not, because that is precisely when the foundation is being laid, the base is being established, and the exponential curve is being set up to bend. The investors who understand that are the ones who are still invested when it does.